I'm here today with co-authors and friends, Robert Jacoby and John Robinette. Never Stop Dancing, A Story of Grief, Male Friendship, and Healing Conversations is the title of their book, published by Inner Harbor House. Welcome, Robert and John. Your book was born out of friendship and compassion following a crisis. John, tell our audience a little about the crisis, and then Robert, if you will, tell us a little about the idea you had to help.
Sure, Lisa. Thank you. I guess I'll start the day it happened. April 29th, 2010, I was greeted at work by a police officer letting me know my wife had died suddenly in a pedestrian traffic accident. We had two children, two boys that were 7 and 4 at the time. You can imagine how that just set me into a place of grief and confusion and just wondering how to get on with life.
Obviously, it was devastating for John. I was devastated seeing him go through this. The first time I visited him that week after I was blown away, I was at a loss how I could possibly help. I have a background I'm a writer by trade, a background in journalism also. And I had previously published a book where I had interviewed someone over the course of several weeks to get their stories. The person was a merchant marine, and so the stories were about his time in the merchant marine for several decades. So I had that background of writing, interviewing someone for a long period of time to do a book, and it just came to me, this idea of sitting with John in conversation for a long period of time, being his friend, talking with him, and then doing the unique thing of recording conversations. So that was the unique twist that I presented him with this idea. We're friends. We're very good friends. I told him, I said, I think we're going to talk about this stuff anyway. Let me record it. And he agreed. And the book came from our raw transcripts.
The friendship that the two of you have is one of the main reasons that you were able to accomplish this. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about how you developed such a friendship that seems to be so uncommon for, especially for heterosexual males or for males who are platonic friends. Can you talk about that?
I've known Robert as long as my older son's been alive. I literally met him when he was a week old. And the company I was working for was partnering with the company Robert worked for on a project. We met during the sort of the early proposal part of that. That's how we first met. It was really around the workplace. We got that work, we won that work, and I wound up spending a fair amount of my time on the job site with Robert, and our offices were right down the hall from each other. We bump into each other regularly. We just started a conversation around music, and it went from there. We'd get together for lunches, and pretty quickly I think we were able to identify areas of common interest around a wide range of topics. But it came back to, I think, we shared experiences as being in marriages, being parents, and it was those conversations, I think, that where we truly connected.
Both of us had a real keen interest in discovery, finding out what other people thought. And I think I would agree with John, this just went back to the first few times we met where we were asking questions beyond the workplace about what you did in your personal life. Did you attend church? What was the marriage like? What were your other friendships like? And then, we quickly explored areas of common interest, and that included politics, history, religion, philosophy, current events. I mean, really on from an early start, nothing was really off limits for either one of us. And I would add to that in our conversations, we both held each other in regard and esteem so that we felt comfortable and free to explore pretty much any topic we'd want to explore. And I think that formed the basis for my ability to ask him as a friend, 15 years later, 10 years later, would you sit with me in this conversation?
Robert and I come from different perspectives around the world. And if you didn't know we were already friends and you just looked at who we were as individuals, you would probably not guess we would be friends. And so I think that our ability to, as Robert was saying, hold each other in regard and also hold on to our individual worldviews as valid and be able to challenge the other person or have difficult conversations, but with respect and dignity. We're not like trying to make the other person wrong. You know what I'm saying? Which I think happens a lot in our discourse these days. That there's somehow that friendship developed in a way that allowed us to reveal that full self in a way that I don't think it's really hard to do these days.
How were the two of you? Now, I know because I've read enough about the two of you that your backgrounds are not that they're so different, but you have differences, certainly. It isn't as though you agree on everything. Why do you think the two of you, Robert, this one will be for you since John just gave us some of his perspective, why do you think the two of you were able to develop such a solid friendship, even though you have many differences?
John's a bright individual, and I'm attracted to that. I'm attracted to bright people. And by bright, I don't mean just intellect or, it's more than that. Emotional capacity, capacity for life, capacity for love and living. And I sense that immediately. I would almost call it in the spiritual realm of things, or spiritual sense of things. And I wasn't afraid to reach out to him. I wasn't afraid to share things with him that most people, I think, at the beginning of a friendship might not share. I felt a comfort with him that was evident pretty soon after we met. And that builds. When you can build on a foundation like that, it makes it stronger and stronger, I think, going forward.
Yeah.
And there's a dependence and a reliance on the person. I mean, John and I, and it's not like we're on the phone or seeing each other every other week. We live about almost an hour apart. But when we get together, it could have been 2 months, 3 months, 4 months since we last saw each other. We just pick right back up.
What can other men learn from reading your book about friendship and compassion?
That's a really good question. For me, we as men, even in our enlightened days, as if we think they're enlightened now, we're still taught either at least implicitly to some of those classic male masculine attributes around strength and protection, and those are valid and necessary, and can also get in the way of being open and vulnerable especially with another man. And I don't know if there's a secret or not, but there's something, I think, courageous and brave in being vulnerable. And it's not like so I'm going to be courageous and brave and be vulnerable today. It doesn't really work that way, for me at least. If it was my background, my parents, or the DNA, I'm 54 years old now, so I'm not sure this has been always true, but at this point in my life, and when Robert and I met, which was 18 years ago, even then, I think that we somehow let out clues to each other that we had some life experiences that weren't fun. And rather than focus on politics and religion, where people tend to shut down, we were able to see past that and see that, we're connected through the broad experience of human life and suffering that comes with that. That sounds big and fancy, I think, hearing myself say it, but I think that's what attracted me to Robert. Was he was able to share what was going on in his life at the time fairly quickly. That was like, okay, this is a deep thinker. As Robert was complimenting me, appreciate that. Robert is also a deep thinker, extremely well-read, maybe the most well-read person I know of personally. I don't know. I don't have the same friendship with all men. So I think there was something in the way we were able to connect. But I think we both came to the table with like this. It's like being able to open up just enough. It wasn't like we were just jumping into our own personal 12-step program right away. It wasn't like that. But there was just enough of, oh, tell me about your kids, or are you married, or what's going on? Oh, I see. Well, it's a little more complicated than it looks like on the outside. Things like that.
Robert?
For me, I'll start out, with the caveat like John did, that this is for me personally. So I'm a poet and a novelist. So by those definitions alone, and by what I do, I tend to think more, grapple with life, question more than your average bear. And it's taken me some time to understand that and feel comfortable enough in my own skin to own that. And it was about that time when I was meeting John, soon after that, going through my own divorce. And it was almost like a rebirth for me to come into my own. And it really, yeah, to shed previous thinking, previous modes of being, if I want to call it that. And, it sounds like a cliche, but embrace who you are and to feel comfortable in your own skin. And that's okay. For me, it was nothing more complicated than that. And meeting John was fortuitous, maybe in that timing that, maybe he came into my life at the time that I needed to have a good friend like that come along.
Go ahead, John.
Not all my male friendships are like, I do have other close male friendships. I just want to
Okay.
be clear. To my other close male friends who might be watching and listening.
Good point. Sure, that's fair.
My friendship with Robert is distinct on its own merit. You know what I'm saying? And so I could count 2 or 3 other men with whom I have close relationships that are distinct on their own merit.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? But not all my male friendships have that same, I just can't, I don't think,
Let's continue with that then, because what I want to know is, what are some of the elements those friendships have in common with the friendship that you have with Robert? Is it about the vulnerability and the trust? What do you think are the commonalities?
There is a level of trust. I think oftentimes in male friendships, there's an undercurrent, maybe a competitiveness, an undercurrent, even if it's not stated. And I don't feel that. Sometimes I do, but it's not a prevailing emotional undercurrent with those relationships. They're free to be sort of how they are. I think these friendships are ones that came to me not at the exact same time in my life, but in my, I'd already become an adult. I have some close friends from my youth, but those are different too. But I think I was able to make these friendships or be a partner in those friendships from a sort of a different adult stance, if you will, as a man. I went through a divorce in my 20s, getting married again, and just whatever lumps, bruises, and scars we accumulate as we grow. So enough of that had happened that I didn't feel like I had to be somebody I wasn't necessarily.
So authenticity is a factor as well.
I think so. To the extent that we know who we are.
Yeah.
Like any of us.
Robert, what do you think about male friendships that you have? How do they compare to, what are the commonalities comparing to the friendship that you have with John?
I have another close friend, but I have to say that, what I went through with John, if we didn't have the book and that experience, I don't know if if our friendship would be what I would consider extraordinary or super unique. I think what I went through with him during that year, he laid his soul bare to me. And there are some things that just aren't in the book. It's as raw as some of the passages are. We did have to turn off the tape recorder and just cry together. It was awful. So having said that, I can truthfully say I haven't gone through something with another man like that episode like I have with John. Now, at the same time, I will say I shared a deep friendship with another man. It's more on an intellectual, philosophical level, but we enjoy our company. And I would springboard off what John had touched on. I think to me, it's more of a bond. It's not competition. So that's, I would say, is the commonality. It's a bonding experience. It's not a competition. And that's not only refreshing, but very much needed for me. My soul needs that. I need that companionship, that friendship.
Each of you is a father. How does this experience with, as you pointed out, Robert, the interview process over the year with John, having that strengthen, deepen your friendship, how has that experience affected each of you as a father? I'm wondering specifically with regard to nurturing boys. Has that affected how you parent, at least with regard to helping the boys to develop male friendships?
There's a sensitivity to it, and also I'm trying to contrast. I can answer that question, I think, two different ways. One about what was going on 10 years ago in the middle of our conversation, and how that influenced me as a father versus today, which is different now. I think, and this is in the book. It sounds cliche. It's in the book too. Is how to be present in the moment, right? And how to, when someone comes to me, my son, one of my sons in particular, but anyone really, is how do I stop what I'm doing? How do I stop the conversation in my head so that I can be 100% into this new conversation? And with children, they're just coming at you. You're in the middle of email or whatever, and so we'll like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll get to that, as a response that's more of a dismissal than an actual conversation or one of engagement. And so that distinction became clear to me, that life was happening around me and I needed to pay attention to it, specifically the life of my two children. It's not to say all of a sudden I was instantly this very focused, engaged father with them. It wasn't. It's not like it changed me per se, but I had now had a new awareness of when I was not engaged with them. It still happens today. So it's not like I taught them, hey, be engaged when you're in conversation, but I try to model, here's what it means to listen to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's just for men, for boys. I think that's just as a human being in conversation. Today, and they're older now. I mean, one's graduated from high school, one's in high school. So how I am with them now is different. And so how to be authentic with them and not hold back is an ongoing project with them. And they're different people, and how I can be in conversation with them is also different. You know what I'm saying? And so just understanding them as individuals, not just my boys, and that they each hear things from me differently based on their age, based on just their personality types, is sort of an emergent awareness for me. I'm not sure that's a good answer, but
what I'm hearing is, in your interaction with your sons, you have modeled the behavior. You've been practicing awareness in modeling the behavior rather than just having them be in the background kind of reacting. You are making a conscious decision to be present with them, and in doing so, you're modeling what is a healthier behavior for them to have with their interactions with others. I can see how that in your parenting can help them to say, oh, this is how my father treated me, and even on a subconscious level, I'm going to treat others this way. Is there anything you did in a more forward manner of teaching them about male friendships, such as you have with Robert?
it's not, this isn't a very good answer, I don't think, to your question. I wish I could give you here the seven, here's the 7 tips
Yeah.
for having that good male friendship. But I think it's just being, hey boys, I'm heading out. I'm meeting up with my good friend Robert. We're gonna, have dinner or whatever. Just let them know that that's part of my life.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Or to have friends come over. The church I'm a member of, for example, we have a men's group where we meet once a month.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty informal. There's hardly any structure to it. And, I'll host it here at our house, I don't know, once or twice a year maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So they see that. So I just make it part of my life. And I don't try to make a big deal about it necessarily. And, teenagers, they're more interested in their peer group and how to separate from their parents anyway. So at this point, I have to let action speak mostly, because I know the words will be rebuffed.
Okay, thank you. Robert, I want to ask you kind of the same set of questions. How have you taught your son about male friendships? And has your relationship with John influenced any of the discussions related in the last couple of years?
Well, this is interesting because the events in the book take place 10 years ago now.
Oh, right.
So where I was 10 years ago. And, we just published the book recently last year.
Yeah, that's what threw me.
It took that long. It took that long to get through that process of just living through that year, doing the interviews, cleaning up the text, revisions, publishing, et cetera, et cetera. But I had to tell you that to tell you this, that who I was 10 years ago. And to answer the first question, I think I was greatly impacted, obviously, from being with John that year. And I think that having that hit, the visceralness of that experience, I couldn't help but be affected and impacted by that. Every time I interviewed him 8 times over that year, every time I came back, sometimes I would just go out to my car and so John and I would speak. We would do interviewing for 30 minutes, 1 hour, sometimes up to 2 hours. Almost every single time, Lisa, I would come back, sit in my car and just weep, just burst into tears. It was so draining being with him and talking about these things. I would come home. My kids were teenagers. One was already out. My son was out of the house, I think, at that point. But it's a cliche to say, but I had a new appreciation, a new discovery for who my children were and what life and the preciousness of life and the immediacy of life. So I think, similar to John's experience, I didn't have a 7-step program. This is how you live, or this is what you should do. Fast forward to today, 10 years later, my children are all adults, and we're on that adult to adult, certainly parent-child, but it's an adult relationship. Each one of my 3 children, I have 1 son and 2 daughters, is unique and special in its own right. And we are who we are. And we're on that playing field of adulthood.
Robert, tell us more about fatherhood, your relationship with your father, if you'd like to share that, and your relationship with your children.
Sure. You don't have to dig too far into psychology or psychoanalysis to understand that men are imprinted from their fathers. They see their fathers as a model, whatever that model might be, good, bad, or indifferent. My father was from the World War II generation. He actually served 3 years in the Pacific. And he brought whatever experiences he had there, and I didn't hear very many of them at all. He brought those experiences back with him to live his life out fully. He was only 18 or 19 when he went into service. And I learned from him, I suppose they would call it the model way of learning, or of him teaching me what it is to be a man, what it is to be a father. Again, good, bad, or indifferent. Were certain pieces missing? Some people might say that. He loved us in the way he was able to express it. Was it a full expression? That's arguable. He might say that he did his job or he did his duty. For me, in my relationship with my children, I can look back, certainly, when they were being raised, when they were children, and I didn't feel present. John talked about that in the book too, where he thought he was present. He felt he was being present and being a good father. But when this catastrophic event happened and Amy was killed, and he had to immediately become a single parent, a single father, that was his realization that, oh wait, what I thought was true was not true. So I think as we get older, we can look back and you don't want to do too much navel gazing. I certainly don't, but I can be present as I can be today, as confident as I can be today, as a parent, as a father, as an older father. I'm a grandfather now. I have 2 grandchildren. That my capacity for love has grown over the years. I don't know if it's that as you get older, you get the edges kind of buffed off of you by life. You get kicked in the head a few times and you get those sharp edges honed down, roughed down a bit, I think. This is my experience.
Yeah.
So again, it's going back to that modeling experience, I think, where I'm present with my children, my grandchildren. I enjoy them for who they are as individuals. And that, to me, is love, being present.
Beautiful. Beautiful. John, if you're willing to talk about your experience in suddenly becoming a a widower and a single father. If you could talk about the grief and the life changes, and specifically, at least if part of it, if you can, what advice would you have for a man in a situation where he's suddenly a single
Mhm.
parent and the grief that takes place there?
Right. And I guess I would preface what I'm going to say is that the events that can trigger grief can be broad and wide. You don't have to lose a spouse to experience grief. I mean, a pet can create grief,
Yeah.
losing a job, um, you know,
Living through COVID.
the num- living through COVID, illness, losing a parent. Um, I think for men, it's complicated to understand what am I supposed to do? And I think our culture puts some expectations on all of us on how we ought to grieve. We'll even talk about the stages of grief sometimes, which I think is a simplistic understanding of the complex range of human emotions that are not linear. They come back, they circle back, they go through the same anger, resentment, shock over and over again. I can say now, 10 years after, realizing that my grief process has continued to this day and has evolved with the years as the years have unfolded, and as I get reminded of it through the life changes of my children. Right, there's a graduation and the mom's not there.
Yeah.
Right, so it's not as crippling as it was, say, 10 years ago, but it's still there nonetheless. I think for men, and this sounds sort of perverse, but the advantage I had at age 42 when my wife died was that I had gone through a loss, had to grieve a marriage in my late 20s. And uh, however that happened, I was in contact with, therapists, with other men, the men's group, just, the coincidence of the relationships I had. So I knew the importance, sort of the essential need for me to seek a professional care, a therapist, and that there were other people who could support me. And so I did not hesitate when Amy died to almost immediately reach out for help. It just felt natural, and because I knew it worked. It worked for me. And so the self-care piece of this for men, I think, is one that's not well talked about or sanctioned, maybe, in our culture, right? There's sort of this sense of men and stoicism and sort of pulling yourself up from the bootstraps that's sort of baked into our whole mythology, especially as Americans, right? And there's wisdom to that, and it's appropriate at times. But I think when, for me in particular, going through the tremendous grief, I knew I had to surround myself with people who could help me. Not just friends, but therapists, acupuncture. I craved human touch so much that getting a massage, just a therapeutic massage, did wonders just for that 1 hour to just sort of escape into the relaxation of that. So it doesn't have to be complicated. So all those things sort of add up over time that I was able to construct for myself a fairly significant support structure. I have my church. My church rushed to my support too. So that I was in a community of faith helped with my survival, especially in those early days. So some of it was just the luck of being in the neighborhood I live in, pretty close, tight-knit group. So, and I know not everybody has that, and that's makes it, I think, for some people who are not connected to their neighborhood, or they're new to their neighborhood, or maybe they don't have a faith community, or even doesn't have to be a faith community, but some community of connection that can provide just, the meals and doing laundry and just the simple tasks of life, especially if you need to care for other people. So we talk in the book, I think, putting on the oxygen mask, which is alludes to if you've been on an airplane and they will give you the speech in the event of a sudden loss of cabin pressure, the oxygen mask will come. And if you're traveling with a young person or someone who needs your assistance, put the oxygen mask on yourself first
Right.
before helping them. And that's because in cabin depressurization, you've got about 20 seconds or you're going to lose consciousness.
Mm.
So if you lose consciousness and someone's depending on you, then you're both in trouble.
Mhm.
Right. So you have to take care of yourself first. And I think men in particular, we don't like, that's not really part of our bringing up, our upbringing, I should say, is to know how to take care of ourselves.
You know, we talked a little bit earlier about how fathers can teach their sons about male friendships, and you were talking about just, demonstrating the behaviors and modeling the behaviors. And it occurs to me that the way you express yourself in grief also is a way to model that for the children, to be honest about your emotions. There's so much in our culture, in the United States anyway, about men and emotions. Men are only allowed to be angry or to be strong businessmen, and thankfully a lot of that is changing. What has been your experience in expressing grief in front of other men who are perhaps more old-fashioned and have, older standards as far as how men are allowed to emote?
Gosh, I'm not sure how to answer that question. I guess the example that popped into my mind as you were saying that is my own father, and I don't really know if it's valuable to go into too much detail, but I just know that it was hard for him to know what to do. Like his instinct as a father to help his son who's in turmoil was clear. Like he wanted to help, but he seemed at a complete loss as to how to actually do that beyond sort of the mechanics of arranging things,
Yeah.
But with that one exception, I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe there was a self-selection process underway already where I didn't really have people like that around me. Or if I did
Ah.
express my deep grief emotions in front of a man who was uncomfortable with it, they self-selected out too. So I don't know if I have good data
Okay.
to be able to
Yeah, that's
report.
fair.
What I did find actually was that not just men, but there were men who, when they saw how, I guess, expressive I had been, they would then share with me deeply held secrets and fears and traumas that they had experienced that they hadn't shared with many people. The loss of a child, an infidelity, the father that was abusive, the alcoholism, just I think this is in the book too, in the epilogue, the range of human suffering
Mhm.
was very clear to me in those early months as other people shared their own loss. When I say loss, I don't necessarily mean death, but their
Yeah.
own loss of innocence, their own loss of love, whatever it was. So it's out. I think the message is it's everywhere, and you really don't have to look that far to find it. And if we just gave ourselves permission to set aside the fear, which I think a lot of the anger you mentioned, it's okay to be angry. I think that's masking an underlying fear of something.
Yes.
And so the anger is as a self-protection mechanism. And really, if we could dig past that into the fear, then we actually become stronger. There's actual courage that then is able to buffer us from the next set of inconvenient abuses, natural disasters, human grievances against each other.
Mhm.
It's endless. It's going to be endless.
Good points. Robert, you had a lot of compassion to reach out to John while he was grieving. Did you have experience with grief that made it a little bit easier for you, or at least so that you knew that this was going to be a helpful experience? What's your experience with grief?
Yes, well, I touch on this in the book, and so I can talk about it here with you, Lisa and John. I'm a suicide survivor, so I think for me, fundamentally, the acceptance or rejection of your own life and your own self is is the prime grief generator, if you will. Are you going to embrace life, or are you going to reject life and end it? So that is part of my background. My struggles off and on in my life, earlier in my life, with depression. I talk about it in the book a little bit too. That also has certainly flavored my worldview, colored my worldview. Having that in me as a person, as a man, approaching John with this idea, I thought and I felt at the time that this would be helpful to him. I saw him in his grief. I saw him struggling. Really, I thought, what can I do to help? How can I help him? And the thought struck me, come to him just with who you are. You're his friend. Talk to him. You have deep, wide-ranging conversations with him. So do that. Be who you are. So that's, and thankfully, John said yes. And, we started our conversation. That's what led to the book.
The reviews have been beautiful, moving. It seems like you have reached people in ways that I imagine you had hoped. If I could have from each of you briefly, who do you think is the reader who will get something out of this?
Because I had the idea for this book, I immediately thought, Lisa, that anyone who is interested in life would be interested in this book. And I don't mean that lightly. I don't mean that on the surface. I mean anyone who wants to grapple with life's issues, what it means to be alive, what it means to love, what it means to reason through life, and what it means to connect with community, to wrestle with God. There's so many things, I should say themes, that John and I both wrestle in this book. This is a book certainly about John's experience through that year. But also it's a book about me as John's friend with him during that year. I think in that way, in that unique way, it's a book about both of us.
Yeah.
And how we were both transformed through these events during that year. And so I think that's what's reaching people. That's what's touching people. I've read, a good number of the reviews, and I think that is how people react to this. Yes, the book, that's a devastating event John went through. There are raw emotions, certainly, especially in the first 40 or 50 pages. But coming out of that, there's a way to live. And that's what I wanted to capture in the moment with John in my interviewing him. How do you get through this? How, not just that atomic bomb event, but how do you recuperate? How do you recover? How do you go on living? I wanted to capture that. And I think that's what people are reacting to so positively.
John, I know my understanding anyway is that you weren't focused on the book, but in the interview process and all of that, of course. Was there a point where you felt like, oh yeah, this as a book is going to help this group of people? Is there a group of people you felt would benefit from reading this book?
Yeah, it's interesting. And at some point, Robert and I were clear that this was going to be something published. Its final form was going to be in the moment. I don't know that we could have imagined, or I couldn't at least.
Yeah.
I think I did have a similar sense of the universality of the life experience, which includes death, that many people could benefit from it. I think now, with sort of the benefit of time and actually seeing some of the reviews and hearing from people who have read it, I think what might be distinctive is an articulation of one person's experience, my experience, but the way Robert was able to pose questions and the way he allowed me to be as vulnerable as I've probably ever been in my life. There's an expression of that grief that is, I would say, raw, poignant. I don't say accurate, doesn't seem like the right word, but what I've heard from other people, a friend of mine lost an adult child in a car accident recently. and right as the book was coming out. And so she had read the book sort of as her grief was unfolding, and she remarked to me a few times, like, I didn't know what was going to happen next. I read your book, and it's like, oh, that explains for me what was going on. And it just touched me deeply that she was able to find maybe some comfort in that what she was feeling or experiencing was her unique experience and also normal. You know, heard from a few other people that it provides an insight for those who are nearby someone grieving, a different way of understanding what it's like. Now I know what Uncle Joe was going through when Aunt Susie died.
Yeah.
Now I understand that differently. And to me, that's just been a remarkable gift back to have just even those kinds of comments. It fills me up with joy's not even the right word. Like I don't want to be happy about that. You know, I guess it's a privilege maybe to have been able to hear those messages. Yeah.
Perhaps for people like your father who didn't know how to comfort you through the experience.
Yeah, perhaps.
Do the two of you have any plans for any kind of follow-up project together?
We do.
We do. John. Yeah, John can talk to it. I'll follow on.
Right. So we have our individual pursuits in life, writing and other things. But with respect to Never Stop Dancing, we're imagining a follow-on, sort of a companion book that would be sort of a daily meditation.
Yeah.
So we've begun going through the book and pulling, small passages or quotable areas that would be, one per day, but then maybe a brief reflection from one or both of us on that passage for that day. And, we probably picked up we're both fairly interested in other wisdom in the world. And so whether it be from scripture or philosophy or history or even current events, sort of interleave with our own words that would be the daily meditation, maybe those from some others that would sort of round out that experience, where we would reflect on it within the sort of the broader themes that are in the book.
Great.
So that's a work in progress.
Excellent.
Yeah, just to add to that because there are so many themes interwoven through the book, this next one, I think, that John and I have talked about would give us both a bit more freedom to explore those themes, whether it's the theme of community or love or God or spirituality or psychology, rituals and traditions. So not so much, Never Stop Dancing was born of a moment. I think we both talked through that our next effort together would be born of love and hope and future forward looking and living and being alive.
Wonderful.
I've got two novels. I've got a novel I'm working on right now, so we're hoping to get to this next project together.
Excellent. Never Stop Dancing is the title of the book. What's the website? Is it the same?
Never-stop-dancing.com.
And Robert, what will our audience find when they go to that website?
The book website is fairly content rich. We have a Q&A session with the two of us, me and John. We have a link to our other media appearances, articles we've written, interviews we've done. We were on some TV shows. People can see video clips of that. There's also a one-pager for book clubs. So it's a good handful of questions to prompt people for questions if they want to read the book during a group discussion. I would say that several reviewers on Amazon.com pointed out that they want to learn more, they want to hear more, and they've noted that would be a good book for a group discussion. We agree, and that's why we posted the book club discussion questions online.
Excellent. Gentlemen, thank you very much for spending your morning with me, recording this, and the Goodman Project. Thanks you for talking about vulnerability and men's emotions especially. So thank you very much. Best wishes to you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa.
Bye-bye.